There's a story we tell about how great powers fall, and through my decades of studying history, I've realized it's the wrong story. We imagine collapse as something you can see, a building coming down, a single crack widening into catastrophe, a date you could circle in a history book and say, there, that was the day. But go looking for that day in the records of the empires that actually lost their place, and you will not find it. It isn't there. What you find instead is something much harder to name. The lights stay on, the currency still spends. The markets open every morning, as they always have, as if nothing in the world has changed. And somewhere beneath all that ordinary motion, unannounced and unrecorded, the most important thing has already quietly moved. Not the money, not the armies, but something far more difficult to see: trust. That's what I want to talk about today. Not a prediction, not a headline, something older and stranger than either a mechanical pattern that keeps surfacing across centuries, always in the same shape, always missed by the people living inside it. I'm going to call it the confidence trap, and I'll warn you now, once you can see its shape, you won't be able to stop seeing it. In the past, certainly. And perhaps, though I'll let you be the judge, closer to home than that, let me be honest with you before we go any further, because this subject draws a particular kind of person, the one who wants to sell you fear. I'm not one of them. I don't know what will happen next. No one does, and anyone who says otherwise is performing. What I can do as an investor is show you a mechanism, show it clearly enough that you'll recognize it on sight, and then we can stand back together and ask, quietly and without panic, whether it's moving again. If it is, you'll be glad you knew. And if it isn't, you'll understand the world a little better than you did. There's no version of this where paying attention costs you anything. So let's start where the pattern shows itself most plainly, with a country that once stood at the very center of the world and no longer does, and could not, while it was happening, tell that it was leaving. For a long stretch of modern history, Britain wasn't a power. It was the power, in a way that's genuinely difficult to picture from here. Its navy held the sea lanes the whole of global trade ran through. Its banks financed ventures on every continent. And its money, the pound, was what the world reached for when it wanted something solid, something that wouldn't dissolve in your hand. Picture a merchant in some distant port who didn't trust the man across the table from him, didn't share his language or his God, and didn't need to, because a contract written in pounds was trusted by them both. That was the empire, not the ships, not the colonies. Those were the visible part, the part that ended up in oil paintings and school books. The real thing was invisible, a quiet, planet-spanning belief that British money was safe, that British promises held, that London simply was the place where the center of the financial world rested. You couldn't photograph it. You couldn't put it in a vault. And that, it turns out, is precisely the problem with it. Here is the part the usual story leaves out, and it's the part that matters most to my analysis. That trust bought real advantages, extraordinary ones. When the world wants to hold your money, you can borrow more cheaply than anyone alive because there is always a buyer for what you issue. When your banks sit at the center of everything, money drifts toward you as if pulled by gravity. You set the terms. You're handed a cushion against your own mistakes because the world's faith papers over a great many cracks before anyone thinks to look beneath. This is the privilege of being on top. And it is a wonderful thing to have, right up until the moment it becomes the very thing that blinds you. Because watch what happens next in the cycle. A nation that holds this kind of trust begins, almost without noticing, to treat it as permanent. And why wouldn't it? It's been there for generations. The people in charge have never drawn breath in a world where it wasn't true. So the privilege of cheap borrowing softens into the habit of borrowing. The cushion that once guarded against error becomes a reason to risk more of them. Strength stops being something the nation maintains and quietly becomes something it spends. And here's the eerie heart of it. None of this feels like decline while it's underway. It feels like an ordinary Tuesday. It feels like strength. The symptoms of dominance get mistaken for dominance itself, and the mistaking feels exactly like confidence. That's the trap. It doesn't look like a trap from the inside. It looks like a perfectly good morning. For Britain, the spending of that cushion came in a form no one would have wished for, and here I want to be careful and fair to the dead. It wasn't simple folly. The first half of the 20th century brought two wars of a scale that's hard to hold in the mind, and wars like those are bottomless things. They swallow money faster than it can be counted. To survive them, Britain drained the reserves it had spent generations building, sold off what it owned, and borrowed heavily, including from a younger country across the Atlantic that had once been its own. It came out of those wars on the winning side, and yet hollowed out in a way that took years to even become visible. The empire was still there on the map, the pound was still spoken of with respect, the institutions still stood, lit and staffed and open for business, but something underneath had shifted, and it had shifted toward a new center of gravity that almost no one had yet learned to name: the United States. And this is the strangest part of the whole account, the part I'd ask you to sit with. The handover had no date. There was no morning when the world woke and declared London finished and New York crowned. It came in stages, across decades, through a long sequence of moments that each on its own looked entirely manageable. The pound's roll thinned a little at a time. The dollars thickened a little at a time. Agreements signed in well-lit rooms merely formalized what had already happened in the dark, years before anyone put a pen to it. And through nearly all of it, you could have stood in the city of London and felt that everything was fine, because in the only sense available to you day to day, it was fine. That's what makes this the quietest catastrophe there is. The decline of financial power makes no sound at all. It is the kind of change that finishes before it announces itself, which is exactly why almost no one catches it in the act. So let's pull back and ask the question this whole story has been circling. What was the actual mistake? Because if we're going to speak of anyone repeating it, we'd better know precisely what it is. And I don't believe it was the cost of the wars or the price of the empire or any single line you could underline in a ledger. I believe the real error, the one that's genuinely repeatable, the one with teeth, was the silent assumption that trust is a renewable thing, that it refills on its own while you sleep. It does not. Trust in a nation's money, its word, its steadiness, is built slowly over a very long time, and it can be spent far faster than it can ever be earned. A country at the summit can coast on stored trust for years, for decades, while the foundation thins beneath it without a sound, and the fatal move every time is mistaking the lag for safety. The world's patience wears the mask of permanence. So the nation keeps drawing down the account, never quite noticing the moment the balance tips, the moment it stops earning trust and begins only to spend it. There is no alarm that rings at that moment. That's the whole horror of it. The most important line a country can cross is the one line it cannot feel itself crossing. That's the mechanism. Now, I have to be honest about where we're going next, because we're about to step off the firm ground of settled history and out onto something far less certain, the present, where nothing is agreed and everything is still in motion. The United States today stands in a position that rhymes with Britain's old one, and based on my research, the rhyme is uncomfortably close. The dollar is what the world reaches for. When a crisis breaks out anywhere on earth, money runs toward American assets, not away, toward them, into them, as if they were the one solid ground left when the floor gives way. American debt is held in every corner of the world precisely because so many believe, without ever quite examining the belief, that it will always be repaid in money that will always be worth something. And this hands the United States the very same extraordinary privilege Britain once held, the power to borrow on a scale no other nation could survive because the appetite for what it issues seems to have no floor. That privilege is real. It is immense. And if you live beneath its shelter, it's worth being grateful for while it lasts. But you can feel the question taking shape now, can't you? Because the warning signs the patent teaches us to watch for are not signs of weakness. They never are. They're signs of something subtler, the slow conversion of privilege into habit, of a tool into a need. So the honest questions, the ones that don't flatter and don't frighten, are these. Is borrowing still a tool, or has it quietly become a dependency? Is the trust still being earned year by year, or only coasted on? Are the institutions that built the world's faith being tended and strengthened or handled as if they could never break no matter how they're treated? I won't invent numbers to give you a shiver because the fear sellers always reach for a frightening statistic, and I'd rather you trust the reasoning than the theater. I'll say only this, and all of it is said openly, every day, by serious people and not cranks. By the measure of its own history, the United States carries a very large debt. The process meant to manage it has grown visibly more chaotic and more fond of standing at the edge of the cliff, and there is a real ongoing argument about whether the long road is sustainable. None of that is hidden. The question the pattern raises was never whether these things are true. The question is what they mean, and that's the one no statistic can answer for you. And here is where the confidence trap turns truly insidious, because every one of those worries can be brushed aside with an answer that sounds entirely reasonable. And the reasonable sounding answers are exactly the ones a nation murmurs to itself on the way down. The world still wants our money, so we must be fine. We've carried debt before, and nothing broke, so nothing will. We're too important to fail. The whole system leans on us. Listen closely to those sentences. Every one of them describes trust that has already been accumulated. Not one of them says a word about whether that trust is currently being refilled or drained. They all mistake the lag for safety. They are the precise sentences the trap is built from, and that doesn't prove them wrong. But it should make you deeply uneasy about how comfortable they are to say. Now, I promised honesty, and honesty has to cut both ways. So let me build the strongest case I can that this time is genuinely different, because it might be, and anyone who tells you the parallel is airtight is selling you something. The largest difference I see is this: there is no successor standing in the shadows the way the United States once stood behind Britain. When Britain's leadership faded, the trust didn't vanish into the air. It moved to a credible air already on the rise. For a decline of that kind to repeat, the world would need somewhere else to put its faith, another money, another center it trusted more. And right now, for all the talk, no such place commands that depth of belief. Part of the dollar's strength isn't America's virtue at all. It's the absence of an alternative. That's a true and substantial difference, and it might mean the United States has far more room to err than Britain ever had, for the strange reason that the trust has nowhere to go. The second difference is structural. The American economy doesn't rest on a far-flung empire that bleeds resources just to hold itself together. Its strengths are of a different kind. A vast market within its own borders, financial markets of unmatched depth, a lead in technology and invention, and a peculiar gravity that keeps drawing the world's most ambitious and capable people toward it. These are wellsprings of renewal that Britain's model simply didn't possess in the same way. They don't make decline impossible, but they change the arithmetic. A nation still busy inventing the future has an engine for rebuilding trust that a nation merely guarding an old throne does not. And the third difference is the simplest and, in a way, the eeriest. We have seen this before. Britain had no worked example to study, no prior case of a modern reserve currency power slipping from its place, laid out for inspection. We do. Whether knowing changes anything is an entirely separate question, and a haunting one, because knowing about a trap and actually stepping around it are famously, almost comically, different things. But the knowledge, at least, is on the table in a way it never was a century ago. What we do with it is an open question. So where does all this leave us? Somewhere more honest, and I think more useful, than either the doom or the comfort. The confidence trap is real. It has closed on dominant economies before, and the mechanism behind it, spending trust faster than you rebuild it while mistaking the world's patience for permanence, is alive and recognizable right now. The warning signs the pattern tells us to watch are visible, not as proof of collapse, as conditions worth taking seriously. And yet the parallel is not fate. The differences are real, and they may weigh more than the similarities. History rhymes, as the line goes, but a rhyme is not a repeat, and only a fool mistakes one for the other. What I'd most like you to carry away from this isn't a forecast, it's a lens. The next time a headline crosses your path about debt or the dollar or some economic milestone dressed up as triumph or as ruin, I want you to ask the quiet question underneath all the noise. Not is the economy strong today? That's the easy question, and the answer is nearly always yes, right up until the morning it isn't. Ask the harder one. Is the trust being earned or is it being spent? Is this a nation tending the foundation its strength rests on, or coasting on a reputation it inherited and never had to build? That question won't hand you certainty. Nothing will. But it will make you much harder to fool by the ones selling panic and the ones selling comfort alike. And in a world drowning in both, being hard to fool is its own quiet kind of wealth. Here's the last strange truth about the confidence trap. Escaping it takes no genius and no luck. It asks for only one thing, and it's the one thing that's hardest to give: the willingness to keep paying attention when everything seems fine, to keep treating trust as something earned every single year rather than something you simply woke up holding. Britain's leaders weren't fools. They were people navigating impossible years, doing what felt reasonable in the moment they were standing in. That's what makes this pattern so durable and so quietly frightening. It doesn't hunt fools, it hunts the comfortable. And the only real defense against it is the discomfort of honest attention, the refusal to let the lights being on convince you that the dark could never come. So no, I won't tell you America's doomed, and I won't tell you it's invincible, because both of those are just elegant ways of refusing to look. The pattern is on the table. The differences are real. The future is genuinely open, more open than either the prophets or the salesmen want you to believe. And the most powerful place you can stand isn't knowing what comes next. It's understanding the shape of the thing well enough that nothing surprises you, whichever way it finally breaks. If you've come this far with me, you're already doing the one thing the confidence trap has never been able to survive. You're paying attention. Keep doing it, and you'll watch the story unfold with clearer eyes than almost anyone around you. That, in the end, is worth more than any prediction I could ever hand you. A quick, honest note on what you just heard. This is an analytical framework built on the broad strokes of well-established economic history, not a precise forecast, and the present-day claims are kept deliberately general because reasonable experts genuinely disagree about them. Treat it as a way of thinking, not a crystal ball, and always do your own reading before drawing any conclusions about your own finances.